You ever notice how we're obsessed with generational labels? Boomers destroyed the economy. Millennials killed napkins. Gen Z can't look up from their phones. But sandwiched in the middle there's this whole generation nobody talks about. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980. They're the coworker who gets everything done without making noise about it. Your parent who raised you but never needed the credit. The people who built the internet we're all addicted to but barely have a social media presence themselves. And here's what nobody wants to acknowledge. Their psychology might be the most fascinating and misunderstood of any generation alive. Let's start with what defined them more than anything. They were latchkey kids. And I don't mean a few of them had to let themselves in after school. This was standard for millions.
Picture this. It's 1978. You're 8 years old. The school bus drops you off. You walk to your house, pull out that key hanging from a shoelace around your neck, and let yourself into an empty home. No parents, no babysitter, no iPad to FaceTime mom, no Ring doorbell for check-ins. You're just alone. You pour some cereal, turn on the TV, all 4 channels, and you wait. By 1984, roughly 7 million kids between ages 5 and 13 were regularly unsupervised after school. 7 million. That's not some isolated thing. That's an entire generation learning at a very young age that nobody's coming to save you. Figure it out yourself. And that empty house rewired their brains. It taught them that consequences are real and immediate. You couldn't text mom for permission. You couldn't Google what to do. You made a choice and lived with what happened next. When your parents finally showed up, discipline wasn't a discussion. It wasn't some feelings-focused family meeting. You messed up, you got punished. End of story. No appeals, no apologies.
Psychologists call this a high-contingency environment. Actions and outcomes connect directly with no buffer. Your brain gets wired to think 2-3 steps ahead because you had to. That's why Gen X has this almost eerie ability to see problems coming before they hit. They're not pessimists. They're running constant simulations in their heads because that's how they survived. But here's where it gets darker. Gen X watched their parents preach one thing and do another. All this talk about commitment, loyalty, doing the right thing. Then divorce rates exploded throughout the 70s and 80s. They watched their dads give 30 years to a company, only to get a pink slip during the next downsizing. The message landed hard. The system will betray you. People will let you down. Promises are worthless. Psychologists call it defensive pessimism. Gen X just calls it Tuesday. They hope for the best, sure, but they plan for the worst, because in their experience, the worst shows up pretty regularly. This isn't cynicism, it's pattern recognition. And it created this emotional armor that makes them seem detached when really they're just protecting themselves from inevitable disappointment.
This is exactly why you barely see them on social media. Not because they don't understand technology. Remember, they built most of it. It's because they grew up when privacy was normal. When you did something embarrassing as a teenager, maybe 10 people knew. Maybe it came up at one party, but it didn't live forever on the internet. No permanent record of every stupid thing you said or wore. To Gen X, broadcasting your life online doesn't feel liberating. It feels dangerous, exposed, vulnerable. They learned early that the less people know about you, the safer you are. So they watch, they lurk, they observe, but they don't participate. Not because they can't, because they remember what privacy felt like, and they're not giving it up for likes. Then there's the irony. Gen X weaponized ironic detachment. Everything's a joke. Nothing's that serious. Keep it light, keep moving, don't let anyone see you care too much. Where did this come from? Try growing up during the Cold War. They did nuclear fallout drills in elementary school.
Teachers calmly explained how to duck under your desk when the bombs dropped, like plywood would protect you from thermonuclear war. Adults acted like total annihilation could happen any random Tuesday. But also, don't worry, everything's fine. When you're raised in that kind of split reality, you learn to hold contradictions. You learn to laugh so you don't scream. You keep distance from everything because attachment feels like setting yourself up for pain. But despite all this, the neglect, the instability, the constant mixed messages, Gen X developed one of the most interesting work ethics of any generation. They don't talk about it. They don't post LinkedIn manifestos about hustle culture. They just show up and do the work. This was forged early through jobs that seem prehistoric now. Paper routes at 5 a.m, where a 12-year-old was responsible for delivering news to hundreds of houses, bagging groceries, running registers at fast food places where you had to calculate change in your head when the system went down. These weren't resume builders. They were raw, unfiltered introductions to adult responsibility. They watched their parents get destroyed by corporate America, so they never believed in company loyalty. But they're obsessed with being competent, with being valuable. They can't control whether they'll get laid off. They learned that early. But they can control whether they're the last person anyone would want to let go. So they make themselves indispensable, quietly, without fanfare. There's this paradox at the core of Gen X. They're simultaneously the most independent generation and the most quietly collaborative. They'll never ask you for help. Been solving their own problems since they were 8. But if you need help, they show up. No drama, no posts about what good people they are. Just do it. This comes from forming deep friendships out of necessity. When parents were absent, your friends became your family because they had to. And that loyalty stuck.
Now, let's talk about authority, because their relationship with it is complicated in a specific way. Gen X respects competence, not titles. If you've earned your position through actual skill and knowledge, they'll follow you anywhere. But if you're just some executive who talks well but doesn't know what they're doing, zero patience. They will quietly undermine you while smiling to your face. They question authority because they watched incompetent authority figures make catastrophic decisions their whole lives. Watergate, Iran-Contra, the AIDS crisis handled with criminal negligence, Vietnam, economic policies that gutted the middle class. They learned young. People in charge don't necessarily know what they're doing, and blind obedience is for suckers. Economically, Gen X got hammered repeatedly. The oldest graduated into a recession, the middle ones got hit by the dot-com crash, the youngest came of age right as 2008 nuked the economy. They've been economically traumatized over and over, which is why so many have multiple income streams. Not because they're naturally entrepreneurial, because they've learned viscerally that nothing lasts.
Every job is temporary. Every company will eventually screw you. Diversify or die. This created psychological baggage. Research shows Gen Xers report significantly lower rates of seeking social support during stress, not because they don't have people to ask, but because asking feels like weakness, like failure. They were raised to handle things alone, and that programming runs deep. It makes them incredibly capable in crisis, but it also means they struggle with vulnerability, with letting people in, with admitting they might need help. Their relationship with information is different too. Before Google, knowledge had weight. Gen X spent hours in libraries, flipping through card catalogs, hunting for one specific book that might have the answer. Information required effort, time, physical labor. And because of that, what they learned stuck differently. When information costs you something to obtain, your brain holds it more permanently. They learned to fix things with their hands, because that's what you did. Bike chain slips, flip it upside down, get grease on your fingers, figure it out. TV goes fuzzy, smack it until it works. Nobody called a technician. You became the technician. This built a mechanical intuition, a belief that with enough patience and the right tool, you could master the physical world. And now, they're raising kids in a completely different universe. Helicopter parents, constant supervision, social media documenting every moment. They gave their kids the attention they never had. But sometimes they worry they've made them soft, too dependent, too visible. Because in the Gen X worldview, being visible means being vulnerable, and vulnerability gets you hurt. Here's the truth. Generation X might be the last generation that truly remembers what it means to be bored, to be alone with your thoughts, to solve a problem without instantly Googling the answer. They're not better than other generations, just different, shaped by a specific moment in history when the old world was dying, but the new one hadn't arrived yet. They're the bridge generation, the middle child of modern history. And bridges don't get parades, they don't get recognition. They're just there, doing the work, holding things together, expecting nothing in return. And honestly, that's the most Gen X thing of all. Not caring whether anyone notices, not needing the credit, just getting it done and moving on.
If this resonated with you, if you're Gen X and felt seen, or if you're from another generation and finally understand your parents or that coworker who never talks about themselves, subscribe. I genuinely appreciate you being here.